Your verdict should say so. Thank you.
May it please the court. Counsel. Good afternoon, members of the jury. Proof, beyond and to the exclusion of every single reasonable doubt. That is the burden that the state of Florida took on when they filed charges against Mr. Walker. The burden to prove to you beyond reasonable doubt that he shot and killed Nilexia Alexander, that he is responsible for her death. When we started this case last week, maybe even the week before, who can remember, you all promised that you would hold the state to that burden. You all promised, and when you were sworn in as jurors, you promised the court that you would presume Mr. Walker to be innocent, not guilty. That presumption, even at this moment, has not left him. Now I'm going to take some time and go over some of the evidence and some of the law that I expect the judge will instruct you on. And when I'm done, the prosecution, Ms. Fawcett or Mr. Terry, will have the chance to come back up here and talk to you again. But this will be my last opportunity to talk to you. I ask that every step of the way, whether I'm talking, Mr. Terry is talking, Ms. Fawcett is talking, you think critically about everything that you have seen and heard in this case. I'd like to start by talking to you a little bit about instruction 3.9, weighing the evidence. This is an instruction, again, that the judge will give you. You'll have a written copy, so you don't have to take notes of anything I'm putting up here. But there's something important that the judge is going to instruct you on. He's going to tell you whether the state has met its burden of proof does not depend upon the number of witnesses it has called or upon the number of exhibits it has offered, but instead upon the nature and the quality of the evidence presented. They can come in here and present 1,000,000 exhibits. They can come in here and call 1,000,001 witnesses. But at the end of the day, the answer is still not guilty unless that evidence is supported and credible, and you are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that they have met their burden of proof. The nature and quality of their evidence comes down to Robert Creed and Stanley Wilson. And now I'm going to talk about them in detail in just a few minutes, but let's take them out of a picture for a quick minute. Because members of the jury, if you go back to that deliberation room and you ask yourself, let's put Robert Creed and Stanley Wilson aside. What evidence is there that Ronny Walker is guilty of first-degree premeditated murder? None. Because what you are left with, if you take Robert Creed and Stanley Wilson out of the picture, you're left with the black car, okay? You're left with Mr. Walker in the car, but you also have Mr. Creed in the car, right? That you can't just discount the fact that every step of the way where you're seeing Mr. Walker or you're seeing Nilexia Alexander's phone, you're also seeing Mr. Creed. So you've got two people at the gas station shortly after the shooting occurs. You've got the DNA, and I'm going to spend a few minutes to talk to you about that. And I know sometimes these testimony of these witnesses can get a bit dense, but I hope you were paying attention. Because if you were, you will know what the witness testified to, the DNA expert, is not what Ms. Fawcett is claiming before you. Because again, remember what I say, what she says, that's not evidence. The DNA comes down to this. First of all, there are 3 people in this mixture that Ms. Fawcett kept bringing up over and over. 3 people. She conveniently left out the 3rd person. Now, is that 3rd person Robert Creed? We don't know. The DNA expert said that she cannot tell you that it is or is not him. She can't include him or exclude him. Could be someone completely different. So keep that in mind, right? That there's not just a DNA mixture between 2 people, being Ronny Walker and Nilexia Alexander. There's that 3rd person. But even more importantly, the DNA witness told you that a mixture does not mean physical contact. It does not mean 2 people left behind their DNA at the same time. She cannot tell you when or even how DNA is left behind. The witness even testified she cannot tell you if there's that presumptive blood that was left behind, that if that blood belongs to Nilexia Alexander. Ms. Fawcett brought up the open wound could belong to Ronny Walker. But again, there is no evidence, there's no way to know how far apart that DNA got there. So when we talk about a mixture, rely upon what the expert witness told you. And what the expert witness told you is that it does not mean that the DNA is happening at the same time. So in Ms. Fawcett's scenario where she has Mr. Walker cleaning the car, for example, perhaps maybe he's cleaning the car and that's where his DNA gets on there. He's wiping down the doors. He's wiping down drying it with a towel. Whatever scenario, right? There are an unmatched number of scenarios as to how 2 different people's DNA can get onto a location at completely different times. So the DNA, although it is important for you to consider, is not as powerful as the state would have you believe, for all of those reasons that I just discussed. So we have the DNA that was left behind. We don't know how it was left behind. We don't know when it was left behind. We have this black car. What else do we have without Robert Creed and without Stanley Wilson? We have the jail calls. Let me talk about that for a moment, okay? I encourage you to go back and listen to those jail calls, especially that one where Mr. Walker is talking about taking a plea deal of 5 years, talking about DNA. What you're going to find is that the way that that call was chopped up, it's not the same conversation. And the judge read you the instruction on the recording being edited. What you're going to find is that it's 2 different conversations happening, right? And think about it. Mr. Walker is facing the death penalty. The state of Florida is trying to kill him because they believe... The state of Florida is seeking the death penalty because they believe that he in fact killed Nilexia Alexander. He knows he's not going to be offered 5 years in prison.
Objection.
Sustained.
He knows that the state is seeking the death penalty. Consciousness of guilt? Really? Does he realistically think he's going to be offered 5 years when the state's seeking execution? No. When you look at the date of the call, when Detective Whelan testified about the date of the call, you'll find out that that call was made the beginning of this year, January 2025. 5 years is what? Almost a time-served sentence for him. So, yeah, he would jump on that to not face the death penalty. Does that mean that he's guilty of killing Nilexia Alexander? Absolutely not. When talking about the DNA, again, you'll listen to it. It cuts off very quickly. He's just saying he got papers that says they found DNA in the car. That's all he says. He doesn't say anything to the effect of, oh man, they got me. They got the DNA. Or, oh man, I thought I cleaned the car better. How did I leave behind the DNA? That's not what's going on. So again, I encourage you to listen to that jail call. The jail call with Erica Sweet. Go ahead, listen to that one. Because what you're going to hear is that Ronny Walker is trying to convince Erica Sweet to cooperate and to testify. Now, you're not going to hear him trying to tell her what to testify to. You're not hearing him tell her anything like, hey, make sure that you don't show up to court. That would be consciousness of guilt. That would be tampering with a witness. But he's not doing that. He's saying her, you got to show up. I need you to show up. I need you to testify. He knew what she was going to testify to. And it wasn't the defense that called her as a witness. It was the state. The prosecution called her as a witness. It's not as though she did Ronny Walker any huge favors by coming in here, saying that she left her phone behind in the car, that he had access to the phone, right? So none of those things equate to guilt, okay? So we've got the car, we've got the jail calls, we've got the DNA, we've got his statements to Detective Whelan. Again, nothing there. He was not as though he gives a confession to Detective Whelan, okay? The state wants to harp on this statement that Detective Whelan claims Ronny Walker made about the fact that he didn't have a working phone for 2 weeks and he broke his phone and all of that. And I'll talk about that some more when we talk about Detective Whelan's investigation. But again, none of those things are proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So, why am I talking about all of this? In order to find Mr. Walker guilty, you would have to believe Stanley Wilson and or Robert Creed. There's no other way around it. There's no other proof that Mr. Walker is at all responsible for the death of Nilexia Alexander. .7, plea of not guilty, reasonable doubt, and burden of proof. I'm going to talk about this instruction a couple of different times, but want to draw your attention to the portion that's highlighted, which says, a reasonable doubt as to the guilt of Mr. Walker may arise from the evidence, the conflicts in the evidence, or the lack of evidence. And I wanted to bring that up because I'm about to go through some of that with you. I'm about to go through the evidence, the conflicts in the evidence, and the lack of evidence, especially as it pertains to when we talk about Stanley Wilson and Robert Creed. .9, weighing the evidence. This is an instruction, and I'm going to go through these in more detail, and they'll be bigger. You'll be able to see them on the screen, but I wanted you to see the instruction. Wilson. There are, not every paragraph is going to apply to every witness, but when we talk about Robert Creed and Stanley Wilson, these are some of the ones that specifically are going to apply to them. Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? Did the witness have some interest in how the case should be decided? Does the witness's testimony agree with the other testimony and the other evidence in the case? Has the witness been offered or received any money, preferred treatment, or other benefit in order to get the witness to testify? Had any pressure or threat been used against the witness that affected the truth of the witness's testimony? Did the witness at some other time make a statement that is inconsistent with the testimony he or she gave in the courtroom? Has the witness been convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor involving dishonesty or false statement? And then there's this rather large paragraph that I'm going to go through with you. I'm going to blow up the text in just a second that we talked a little bit about, I believe, in jury selection. And it specifically tells you, you must consider the testimony of some witnesses, and again, we're talking about Robert Creed and Stanley Wilson, with more caution than others. For example, a witness who claims to have helped the defendant commit a crime, or who hopes to gain more favorable treatment in his own case, may have a reason to make a false statement in order to strike a good bargain with the state. This is particularly true when there is no other evidence tending to agree with what the witness says about the defendant. So while a witness of that kind may be entirely truthful when testifying, you should consider his testimony with more caution than the testimony of other witnesses. However, if you find the testimony of such witnesses convince you beyond a reasonable doubt of the defendant's guilt, or other evidence in the case does, then you should find the defendant not guilty. Or, I'm sorry, you should find the defendant guilty. So let's talk about Robert Creed and go through some of those factors as it pertains to his testimony. Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? The interesting thing about Robert Creed is that it appeared as though during his testimony that he had a more accurate memory here in this courtroom 3 or so years later than he did when he spoke with Detective Wheeland, when he spoke with Mr. Terry, when he spoke with me, all on prior occasions, right? Because his testimony is that now he's suddenly recalling facts that he never previously gave to anybody. Facts like the fact that he specifically recalls staying at Ronny Walker and Erica Sweet's home between April 29th and May 1st. He specifically recalls that here today. That's information he'd never previously given to anybody. And he was asked that question. He was asked by Detective Wheeland. You heard Detective Wheeland said, yes, he had a conversation with Mr. Creed about where do you stay? Mr. Creed told him, I stay with my brother, or I stay over in St. Pete with my girlfriend. Never before mentioned that he stayed with Ronny Walker. That was some new information that he suddenly remembered here today. Or I'm sorry, here this week. Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? You are all the trier of fact. The witness's demeanor on the witness stand and their attitude and testimony towards the attorneys, that is all something for you to consider. That's a determination that you can make on your own. Did the witness have some interest in how the case should be decided? Well, certainly Mr. Creed has a lifetime of interest, right? Because if it's not him that shoots and kills Nilexia Alexander, or I'm sorry, if it's not Ronny Walker, then it must be him, right? That's essentially the conversation that he had with Detective Wheeland. So yes, Mr. Creed has every interest in having this case decided with a guilty verdict. Does the witness's testimony agree with other testimony and other evidence in the case? And so there's quite a bit to unpack here. So I'm going to start with the communication on his phone between him and Nilexia Alexander, okay? And Mr. Creed is sort of all over the map when it comes to this, okay? Because up until this week in this courtroom, when you all heard it, he has always said, oh, that's my cousin. My cousin knew her, right? His cousin somehow, in the greatest coincidence of the world, knew 14-year-old Nilexia Alexander. His cousin is making those phone calls or text messages with Nilexia Alexander, sometimes in the middle of the night, right? That was all his previous statement, right? And he had never once said anything different. Detective Wheeland said every time he was asked about those calls, he said, yes, my cousin gave a name, Nicole, gave an address as to where Nicole could be found. Suddenly, here in this courtroom, now all of a sudden, Mr. Creed recalls, well, you know, Ronny Walker had access to my phone a few times as well. And that's during the weekend when I was staying with Ronny Walker as well. So the phone communication, right, it's not adding up. It is not adding up with anything that he testified to. It is not adding up with the physical evidence that we have, the phone records that we have. Because if you go back and you look at the records, you're going to see that the contact that first begins between Nilexia and Creed, that contact is an outgoing call from Nilexia to Robert Creed. So if the phone's not ordinarily Ronny Walker's, and Robert Creed wants to try and have you believe that this is Ronny Walker using the phone, how is the first communication an outgoing call from Nilexia to Ronny Walker on someone else's phone? It doesn't add up. And again, the timing of all of the calls that I mentioned as well. Is it the cousin? Is it Ronny Walker? Who, the point is that Mr. Creed was all over the map when it comes to this issue. Contact with Robert Parker. This is another big one, right? And Robert Parker, you might remember, that's the person that text message was sent to. Hey, this is Q. Robert Parker is the one where there are several phone calls being made from Erica Sweet's phone to Robert Parker, starting from the night of the murder all the way into the following day. And Mr. Creed's given different answers about this as well, right? His testimony here in this courtroom to you was that he never used Erica Sweet's phone. He's never used the phone. He doesn't have any explanation as to how those messages would have appeared from Erica Sweet's phone. He told you that the messages were sent from Nilexia, and they were sent using Nilexia Alexander's phone, and that the phone calls were made by Nilexia Alexander on Robert Creed's behalf. You know from the testimony and the evidence that none of that is true. There's not a single communication that appears on Nilexia Alexander's phone records to corroborate what Mr. Creed said. And what's more, we know that all of that communication occurs after Nilexia Alexander is dead. So, does Robert Creed's testimony agree with the other testimony and the other evidence in the case? Absolutely not. Then we get down to the actual facts of what happened inside the car, what happened at the time that Nilexia Alexander was shot. Robert Creed would have you believe that Ronny Walker took a gun in his left hand from that front driver's seat. Remember? He's sitting in the front driver's seat. He takes the gun in his left hand, somehow reaches over and turns around to shoot Nilexia Alexander in the back seat of the car. Is that reasonable? Is that reasonable? No. Especially when you consider the medical examiner's testimony and the fact that there is no bullet hole, no damage, nothing inside that car. Okay? Remember, Nilexia Alexander sitting in the back of the driver's side. There is one wound and one wound alone to the right side of her body. And that is that shot to the face, to the cheek on the her belongings, right, the phone cord and her drink, and get out of the car and scurry over to that empty lot where she was found. So, the shot to the cheek is the only shot on the right side of the body. We know that that shot could not have occurred inside the car. In order for Nilexia Alexander to get out of the car, she'd have to be able to move. And so that's where Mr. Terry comes up with his example of, well, isn't it possible that if someone's sitting in the back seat of a car, they see a gun come over to them, they turn towards the gun, and they kind of put their arm up to keep them from getting shot, right? That was the example that he posed to the medical examiner. That's the example he has to pose to the medical examiner. Because to believe Robert Creed, that is the only shot that could possibly occur inside the car. The shot to the back of the left arm. That's the only shot. Because you heard the testimony of the medical examiner. That is the only shot where Miss Alexander would have been able to get out of the car at that point. All of the other shots would have rendered her immediately unconscious. Does it make sense that if someone was pointing a gun at her from the front seat of the car, that instead of turning to her left and getting out, she instead is going to turn towards the gun? That doesn't make any sense. And then again, the physical evidence. Robert Creed testified all of the windows are up. There are no bullet holes or gunshots that go through the window. There's no ripping or tearing in the upholstery. There's no evidence of any sort of gun being fired inside that car. So when it comes down to how the shots occurred, no, the witness's testimony does not agree with the other evidence in the car. You know, Mr. Terry asked some questions about when a bullet is traveling, doesn't it lose some velocity? Sure, it loses its speed. But you heard it also, the medical examiner testified, this is not a bullet that went through any sort of major artery, did not go through any bones, it went through skin, in and out. So what, the bullet just happened to fall in the back seat of the car without ripping or tearing anything? And Mr. Walker was able to find it and get rid of it before anyone else did? That's not reasonable. Mr. Creed's entire story of how this occurred has reasonable doubt written all over it. But I'll take it even a step further. Why, if Mr. Walker has this grand premeditated plan to shoot and kill Nilexia Alexander, why is he involving a third person? Why is he waking up a man who is sick and vomiting and has a stomach problem and making him sit in the front seat of the passenger car? For what? What purpose would Robert Creed have in the car? That's something that you should consider, right? Is the story that Robert Creed is telling you, is that reasonable? No, it doesn't add up. Also, when you consider the fact that, right, Robert Creed tells you that he was so sick, he was slumped over, he didn't want to be there, Ronny Walker forced him to be there. Why is he texting his cousin to take him to a bar? Because that's what he told Detective Wheeland. Detective Wheeland testified when he confronted Robert Creed about those messages where Mr. Creed was reaching out to his cousin, Mr. Creed was saying, yeah, I was trying to get a ride to go to the bar. So again, that does not add up. That does not agree with the other testimony and the other evidence in the case. So I'll move on to the next question. Has the witness been offered or received any money, preferred treatment, or other benefit in order to get the witness to testify? Well, of course, we know he's never been charged with murder. When he agreed to testify against Mr. Walker, the state released him without having to pay any bond. Now, he's still in jail because he was unable to get an address for his GPS monitor, but certainly if he wanted to get out and had an address, he would be able to. That is a benefit that he received by cooperating with the state. And then, of course, he could be facing up to 30 years, sure, but you heard him out of his own mouth. He's hoping that at the end of all this, he just simply gets to go home. That's the benefit or that he is hoping to receive. Had any pressure or threat been used against the witness that affected the truth of the witness's testimony? And I'm sure that it wasn't fun to listen to, but that is why I went through every painstaking statement that Detective Wheeland made to Robert Creed during that second interview. And here's an example of just one. If you didn't tell us the truth, you were going to be indicted on first-degree murder. That's the last thing that Robert Creed hears from Detective Wheeland. If you didn't tell us the truth, you were going to be indicted on first-degree murder. So now, Robert Creed is left with that impression that if he doesn't continue with the story that Ronny Walker is responsible for the death of Nilexia Alexander, then he would be the one that could be charged with first-degree murder. Did the witness at some other time make a statement that is inconsistent with the testimony he or she gave in the courtroom? Well, of course, we know that entire first statement he gives to Detective Wheeland, that is all a lie. He tells Detective Wheeland he didn't know anything about the murder. He doesn't know Nilexia Alexander. He knows nothing about any of this. There's that statement that he makes here that he was sick, he was slumped over in the car, yet he's some reason calling his cousin for a ride to the bar. He acknowledged to Detective Whelan that that was in fact him using Erica's suite phone to make all of those phone calls and all of those text messages, or that text message to his cousin. He denied that here in the courtroom in front of you. And then, of course, as I previously stated, he now claims that he would sometimes stay with Ronny Walker. When he was previously asked, he stated that he stayed with either his brother or his girlfriend in St. Petersburg. Same thing about the phone, right? When he was previously asked, how is your phone contacting Nilexia Alexander? He didn't say that that phone was contacting her because of Ronny Walker. He said that phone was contacting her because of his cousin. Has the witness been convicted of a felony or misdemeanor involving dishonesty or false statement? And for Mr. Creed, he has 21 felony convictions. You are able to consider that when determining his credibility as well. And then finally, that last paragraph about you should consider witnesses' testimony with a more critical eye. Same things I previously said, not facing a murder charge, released without having to pay the bond, and he's hoping to go home. So, when you consider Robert Creed's testimony, it has reasonable doubt in all three of those places. It has reasonable doubt in the evidence, right? How he's claiming the shooting happens. He has reasonable doubt in the conflicts in the evidence, the different statements that he gave. And it's got reasonable doubt in the lack of evidence, lack of anything corroborating, anything that he's saying about, oh, it was someone else using the phone other than me. Or, oh, Nilexia Alexander made those phone calls, not me. So let's move on then to Stanley Wilson. Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? And there are lots of different things that Mr. Wilson and I went back and forth on, and I would ask that you just recall, either from your own notes or your own recollection, some of the things that he was inconsistent about, but or that he had a poor memory about. And one of those things was, how many conversations did he have with Ronny Walker? Because when he testified on direct examination to Mr. Terry, he told Mr. Terry about one conversation that happens at Ronny Walker's mom's house. And then when I questioned him, I said, well, didn't you give us a previous statement where you said that there were two different conversations, one at Ronny's mom's house, one at the cousin's house, or his niece's house? And then all of a sudden he recalled, oh yes, there were two different conversations. And then all of a sudden he was able to recall those details. He previously had recalled that conversation happened in the month of May, right? He admitted that. He acknowledged to that. He acknowledged, yes, I previously told you that I had this conversation with Ronny Walker in May before I turned myself in Manatee County. It was only here in the courtroom that he remembered that he turned himself into Manatee County sometime in July, and that the conversation must have happened the day before he turns himself into Manatee County in July. But you heard from Detective Whelan, right? There is no record of Mr. Wilson turning himself into Manatee County on the same day that Ronny Walker gets arrested. And that's significant because no one forced Stanley Wilson to give this statement saying that this conversation happens the day before. Nobody forced him to say that. He said that on his own, emphatically. I brought that to his attention numerous times. He has said, the conversation with Ronny Walker, where Ronny is confessing to me, happens the day before I turn myself into Manatee County, happens the same day that Ronny Walker gets arrested, the day before Ronny Walker gets arrested. So clearly his memory is wrong in that account as well. He told you here in the courtroom that Nilexia Alexander was shot in the cheek. Ronny Walker told him that. But I drew his attention to the fact that I talked to him just a couple of weeks ago, and he previously said Ronny Walker never told him where he shot Nilexia Alexander. Well, now suddenly he remembers, oh, Ronny Walker must have told him, shot her in the cheek. He's previously said that Ronny Walker has never tried to blame this on Robert Creed, and that Ronny Walker has always said that he was the one that shot and killed Nilexia Alexander. He testified here in the courtroom to something different. He testified at first Ronny tried to blame Creed, and then he went ahead and confessed to me. In the courtroom here, Mr. Wilson testified that Mr. Walker told him he turned around and shot Nilexia Alexander, who was sitting in the back seat. But when I drew his attention to a previous statement that he made, he previously said Nilexia Alexander was sitting in the front passenger seat. That's what Ronny Walker told him. So again, all of these contradictions in his memory as to the facts that he's claiming Ronny Walker told him. Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? Again, that is a credibility issue, a judgment call that you all get to make. Did the witness have some interest in how the case should be decided? And he told you about his plea agreement, that he has pled guilty here in Hillsborough County to 5 years in prison. He should have been doing 10 years, but they gave him a break, and they're holding that sentence over his head, that they can come back and they can give him the full 10 years if he does not come in here and testify against Ronny Walker. Does the witness's testimony agree with the other testimony and the other evidence in the case? There's no evidence that Nilexia Alexander, Ronny Walker, or Erica Sweet had any kind of STD. Erica Sweet was on the witness stand. Certainly the state could have asked her. You heard the testimony of the medical examiner. No evidence that Ronny Walker had any kind of STD, right? So sure, Stanley Wilson is saying these things. He's saying that, oh, this is what Ronny Walker told me, but there's no other evidence to corroborate that. Robert Creed doesn't corroborate that. Robert Creed doesn't tell you that they're arguing over some kind of an STD. Robert Creed says there's one thing only that is said by Ronny Walker. Are you having sex? Nothing about an STD, right? Now, the state wants to read that into he was talking about an STD. There's no evidence of that. There's no proof of that. Certainly, if Mr. Creed had heard something about an STD, you would have heard about that too. And then again, there's this timeline that Mr. Wilson is completely off on. Because remember, he says that the conversation with Ronny Walker, where Mr. Walker confesses to him, this happens, and it's premised on essentially three. Robert Creed out of Pinellas County. Well, I guess Mr. Walker must have had his magic ball on his hand, because remember, at that time, when this conversation is supposedly happening, there hasn't even been an arrest warrant out for Robert Creed. Let alone the fact that Robert Creed wasn't arrested until several weeks later at the end of July. This isn't a situation where Mr. Walker is saying, oh, I think you're probably going to need to help me out with a friend. No. Stanley Wilson testified that Mr. Walker specifically told him, Robert Creed's in Pinellas County. I need you to help bond him out of Pinellas County. Again, none of the evidence complies or comports with that. Mr. Terry told you when he got up here in opening statement, right? Mr. Wilson is a con man. And you heard the situation that Mr. Wilson was in when he decided to contact the state of Florida to tell them about all of this wonderful information that he had. He was about to have his bond revoked. He was about to go to prison. So, has the witness been offered or received any money, preferred treatment, or other benefit in order to get the witness to testify? Yes. The second he gave that statement, he is no longer facing the penalty of having his bond revoked. That is withdrawn by the prosecutor's office. Again, he was facing 10 years in prison. He got about half of that time. The rest of it is being held over his head. Had any pressure or threat been used? Yes, we talked about the 10-year prison sentence. Did the witness at some time make a statement that is inconsistent with the testimony he or she gave? I'm not going to repeat all of the things that I previously said, but we talked about that when we discussed his memory or lack thereof. Has the witness been convicted of a felony or misdemeanor involving dishonesty or a statement? 171 felonies. Now, what that means is up to you, right? You can determine how significant that is. But clearly, it is a consideration that the law is telling you you can consider. Just think about that, right? Why are you being told this is something you can consider? 30 misdemeanor crimes of dishonesty. That is the caliber of the witness that the prosecution has brought before you to prove Mr. Walker's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. 171 time convicted, felony convicted, con man, Stanley Wilson. That long paragraph about benefits and such and considering testimony more critically, Mr. Wilson was desperate to speak to the state attorney's office. He made a phone call himself, and then he made sure his attorney followed up as well. Again, because he knew what kind of a situation he was in. That motion to revoke his bond was then withdrawn, and that 5-year prison sentence was offered. Stanley Wilson's statement has reasonable doubt written all over it. It is no coincidence that when I sat up here and I went through all of the details that he gave about the actual shooting, right? About it happening, where Nilexia Alexander was shot, where the car went afterwards, all of those things were in a news article. A very detailed news article that was printed just before he picked up the phone to contact the state attorney's office. And that may sound silly, but remember who we're dealing with here. We're dealing with Stanley Wilson, right? The guy who wheels and deals, sells insurance, and pretends to be a bondsman, and all of those kinds of things. Something else you should consider when it comes to Stanley Wilson's testimony. He told you straight up, he didn't really know Ronny Walker. He knew Mr. Walker's family. So if he doesn't know Ronny Walker, is it reasonable to believe that Ronny Walker is going to walk up to him and say, hey, I killed a girl. I need your help trying to get out of it, and give this full confession, giving him every detail from I shot her in the cheek to, and then I tried to blame it on Creed. And, oh, but Creed, I gave him a description of Creed's son. Oh, and Creed's son, he has dreads. Oh, but Creed, my friend, the real Creed, he's bald-headed. Does that sound reasonable, that this is the conversation that's going to be happening? Or does it sound more reasonable that Mr. Wilson read some of those details in the article and he then claimed that Mr. Walker gave him a confession? That's what's reasonable. Did Mr. Stanley Wilson, did he give every detail that was in the article? No. But go back and look at your notes and ask yourself, was there a detail, a verifiable detail, right? Not a gun being thrown into the Hillsborough River, but a detail that you know from somewhere else in the evidence. Is there a detail that he gave that was not in that news article? No. So I want to move on then to talk about the investigation. And I want to be clear about something. Detective Whelan's not a bad person, right? When we talk about the investigation, I'm not trying to convince you that he's not a good person or that you should dislike him. I am talking about the caliber of the investigation that was conducted here. I want to be perfectly clear about that. When I asked Detective Whelan about the reasons why he issued a warrant for first-degree murder on Mr. Walker, he gave me his list of reasons, right? We've got Robert Creed's at the gas station. Ronny Walker's at the gas station, but we also know that Robert Creed's at the gas station. He told me, well, Ronny Walker's in this car where Nilexia Alexander's phone is traveling with it, but we also know Robert Creed is using the phone to contact Nilexia Alexander. I'm sorry, he's using the phone to contact Nilexia Alexander. We also know Robert Creed is using Erica Sweet's phone to contact his cousin. We also have Robert Creed on the video at TGH, right? And we also have Robert Creed in Ronny Walker's car at all times during the investigation. So everything that he told me about Ronny Walker and the reasons for the arrest of Ronny Walker, each and every single one of those things is true as it pertains to Robert Creed. So, why is it that Ronny Walker is sitting here and not Robert Creed? You've heard through the statements that were introduced of the things that were said during that second interview with Robert Creed. They were desperate in the investigation at that point. They needed answers. They needed to know who their trigger person is. They needed someone to tell them who the trigger person was. And so Detective Whelan went about the way that he went about it. Lying, using pressure, telling Mr. Creed he could be arrested and charged with first-degree murder if he didn't give the statement at that time. Those are all the tactics that were used by Detective Whelan, right? He was putting pressure on Robert Creed. Robert Creed asked if he can get an attorney. Detective Whelan says, yeah, we can get you an attorney, but I'd rather get the ball rolling on this statement. And ultimately Robert Creed agrees. Okay, yeah, let's just get the ball rolling on the statement, right? Detective Whelan approaches this interview very differently from other interviews. In other interviews, you heard him say, yeah, we don't give out a whole lot of information. I want to know what the witness knows before I tell them anything. And that clearly was not the case. Mr. Creed was spoon-fed the information that Detective Whelan wanted him to have. And Robert Creed gives Detective Whelan about information. Right? That phone contact between Robert Creed's phone and Nilexia Alexander, it's not nothing. It is something. It is significant. But as significant as that is, Detective Whelan doesn't see fit to follow up and to see if what Robert Creed is telling him is the truth. He doesn't follow up to talk to Robert Creed's cousin, Nicole. Doesn't even try to look for her. It's not as though he tried to find her and couldn't find her. He doesn't even try to look for her to verify what it is that Robert Creed has told him. The investigation, the way that it went about, the tactics that it was used, all set up. They were all set up to appear the way that they appear here today, which is that they have their witness coming in to point the finger. Because if they didn't have a witness to do that, then it's nobody. Then they can't prove anything. Ms. Fawcett talked to you about first-degree premeditated murder, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through the jury instruction with you. But what I am going to tell you is that you obviously will have a definition of what it means to be first-degree premeditated murder. And what I'm going to ask is that if you find yourself in a situation where you are looking at the charge of first-degree murder because you believe the state has met their burden in proving that Ronny Walker is guilty of killing Nilexia Alexander, that you also then consider the entire law, including the lesser included crimes. The lesser included crimes are going to be that of second-degree murder and manslaughter. You're also going to be given an instruction by the judge about adequate provocation and heat of passion. Adequate provocation and heat of passion will have steps for you to follow where you can look at and see, okay, if I do think Ronny Walker did this, then is there adequate provocation? Was there an argument that was happening and this happens out of heat of passion? So I would just ask that you consider all of the law if you find yourself in a situation where you are considering that. Tampering with physical evidence. Again, the evidence in this case essentially is going to come down to Robert Creed and Stanley Wilson. When it comes down to the evidence about cleaning the car, getting rid of any kind of evidence or something like that, you're essentially left with Mr. Walker's boss from the Giant Motors, right? Where he said, yeah, we saw him taking a long time cleaning the car one day. Yeah, it could have been a little bit odd. But he didn't tell you when that happened. He couldn't remember. We don't know if that but they have not proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Walker actually did anything to clean the car in an attempt to get rid of evidence from a homicide. They have not provided any information or any proof to you, verifiable proof, that he got rid of a murder weapon, that he picked up shell casings from the ground and got rid of those, or that he threw Nilexia Alexander's phone out the window or got rid of it for some reason. You know, what's interesting about Nilexia Alexander's phone is that it basically stops communicating with cell phone towers very shortly after that Tampa General Hospital video. Who do we know that gets in the back seat of the car at the Tampa General Hospital? It's not Ronny Walker, Robert Creed. Right? So that's something to consider. Did Robert Creed discover the phone? Did he get rid of the phone? I want to go back to that reasonable doubt instruction. Plea of not guilty, reasonable doubt. If after carefully considering, comparing, and weighing all of the evidence, you do not have an abiding conviction of guilt, rather it is one which is not stable, but one which wavers and vacillates, then the charge is not proved beyond every reasonable doubt, and you must find him not guilty, because the doubt is reasonable. It is to the evidence introduced in this trial and to it alone that you are to look for that proof. When you go back into that deliberation room, ask yourself this question. Is it reasonable? Is it reasonable to believe that Robert Creed is the one that killed Nilexia Alexander? And if when you ask your question, if you ask that question to yourself and your answer is, it's reasonable, then you have a reasonable doubt. The state of Florida has not provided you with the tools necessary to prove that Ronny Walker is responsible for the death of Nilexia Alexander. They have failed to do that. Their case boils down to Robert Creed, who doesn't want to be charged with first-degree murder, and a con man who concocted a plan to keep himself out of trouble. That's what their case boils down to. And then lastly, if you find yourself in a situation where you do think it's reasonable Robert Creed shot and killed Nilexia Alexander, that's when you consider that principal theory that the judge is going to instruct you on. But I want you to pay attention to the law that the judge is going to give you on mere presence. Mere presence at the scene of a crime is insufficient to find a defendant guilty of that crime. Likewise, knowledge that a crime was occurring or was about to occur is insufficient to find the defendant guilty of that crime. This remains true even if the defendant fled from the scene of the crime. And I'll just stop there. If you find that you believe Robert Creed did in fact shoot and kill Nilexia Alexander, then the question will be, did Ronny Walker do anything to help him? And the answer to that question is no. Right? You would have to find, under that principal theory, that Ronny Walker knew that a first-degree premeditated murder was going to happen. Not that he thought it was maybe, something kind of odd is going on between Mr. Creed, who's, an older man, and a young 14-year-old girl. Not that he thought that that was weird, but that he knew that Robert Creed intended to kill Nilexia Alexander. And he drove Robert Creed and Nilexia Alexander to this location for that purpose, to kill Nilexia Alexander. There's no proof of that. There's no evidence of that. You heard Detective Whelan. There's no evidence that Robert Creed did anything wrong other than lie to them in their investigation, right? So how can the state of Florida come up here with a straight face and ask you to find Mr. Walker guilty of a crime, not because he killed someone, but because he helped someone kill Nilexia Alexander? That defies all logic. You can use your common sense when you go back there, and I ask very much that you do so. You heard the testimony. First of all, Ms. Fawcett repeatedly referred to this as an abandoned area or a desolate area, something to that nature. You saw the neighborhood. You saw the houses surrounding the area. You saw the lights on the street. This is not an abandoned area. Even more, you saw that the car did not stop at the dead end of the street. Rather, the car drives towards the middle of the street by that abandoned lot. So it's not as though Mr. Walker would have driven the car to try to conceal it because he knew a first-degree murder was about to happen. There's no evidence on the record, right? That their evidence is one of two things. Ronny Walker did it or he didn't. That's it. There's no evidence that he helped anyone else commit a crime, that he knew that a murder was about to happen. In closing, I would just like to remind you of that presumption of innocence that Mr. Walker started with. The presumption that remained with him through each and every witness and each and every exhibit, each and every piece of evidence. That presumption is still with him even now because the state has not proven their case. If you go back there in the deliberation room and you find yourself on the fence, you're not sure, you're going back and forth, well, maybe Ronny Walker did it, but maybe Creed did it. They both could have had access to do it. I'm not sure. Those are all reasonable doubts. If you find yourself back there in the deliberation room, asking yourself, going back and forth, I can't believe what Robert Creed is telling me because none of that is credible or believable. I don't believe Mr. Stanley Wilson, because none of what he's telling me is believable. That, again, that is reasonable doubt. Ronny Walker is innocent. He is not guilty. I am asking that you return the only verdict that is supported by the facts and the evidence in this case. That is a verdict of not guilty as to each count. I thank you very much for your time and attention.
Carrie? Can we approach real quick? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, before we do the last 45 minutes of this, we're going to give you all about a 5-minute break to touch base, get a drink, whatever you need to do, see you back in. Thank you.
All right, for the jury.